the idea of working on something for years might seem uh, daunting, especially in a world where everything around them in the media changes so quickly and everything in their lives changes so quickly. But change can be hard. Um, it can take years. It can take decades to really change an issue. So just staying committed over the long term, being unafraid to say what you mean and mean what you say, um, not being afraid to be called, a feminist, or somebody who is loud and really using their voice. Uh, that's what our voices are for.
Let's talk about creating a life and country we're proud of. Together, I'm your host, Alvina Vasquez. Welcome to Alvina Talks Shift. Today, I have a very special guest, Susan, who we've been working together, I guess, around 3 years, but now very specifically as partners. And as I sold my business to SE2, we're now partners like a couple. We are it for
Married,
marketing and
as it were.
PR. So I am so excited, Susan, to have you on because I feel that you and I have similar backgrounds-ish in the political nonprofit space. And so I wanted to explore that a little bit with you today and where you think the future is for communications, marketing, and PR, because I feel like there's a lot of changes happening in the way that we communicate with each other. But first, I want to tap into your experience with working with the late Pat Schroeder, who has been given credit for mentoring a lot of young people when she was in office. This is a time when very high profile things were happening that really changed kind of the trajectory of women in the workplace. Like the case with Clarence Thomas, we learned about hostile work environments and all these like new terms that changed how women were interacting and interfacing in their professional settings.
Yeah, it was a really interesting time for women, and also in my own career. So I worked for Pat when I was in my late 20s through early 30s. Um, I worked for her when I had my first child, and delivered my second child right after she left office. Excuse me. So I was with her for her last 5 years in office. And it was a really time when there were a lot of really high profile issues affecting women and families. Pat had been working on the Family and Medical Leave Act at that point for many years, and it finally passed when right toward the end of her tenure in Congress. And that was really obviously groundbreaking legislation that made sure that people didn't have to choose between going to work and taking care of important family needs like the birth or death of a loved one or serious illness, um, or the taking care of a child that had been either born or adopted in their family. Um, so there were some really pivotal things. There were also, as you said, some high profile and unfortunately negative things happening with respect to women. And Pat was that champion who was unafraid to take on some of these issues, whether it was making sure that women who were in the military were receiving equitable treatment. There was time around some very high profile contentious issues affecting women. Sexual assaults in the military became a very high profile issue. As you mentioned, Clarence Thomas and Anita Hill, and the treatment of her when she testified um, before Congress. The Violence Against Women Act was a very high profile issue at that time. And whether it was defending women or working to advance the rights of women, including taking care of their families, um, was something that Pat never shied away from. She was a champion till the end.
And just to highlight how long these fights take. In Colorado, paid family leave was only passed in 2020, 4 years ago, that expands the rights for workers to take time off for, like you said, death, family illness, adoption, in addition to having a child or even taking on, family children. So that's how long it takes to win some of these battles sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that advocates, including those who are working on behalf of women and children and family issues, have to be committed to the long haul. When I think about some of the women that I was fortunate to work with on these issues when I was working with Schroeder, many of them are still doing that same work today. Um, childcare has taken on a whole new level of importance in
Yeah.
the collective conversation now, especially since COVID happened, and there's just much more attention being given to that issue. But I remember working with Anna Jo Haynes, who was a
Yeah.
fierce and relentless advocate of quality childcare um, 40 years ago. These things do take a long time, and you might be looking for incremental change at a policy level year after year, and you just have to stay committed to the fight.
It's interesting you bring up Anna Jo because she is a huge influential person in our community. I think she's credited so many big wins for children and education. So I'm glad you brought that up because it makes me think of how this older generation of women, Pat's gone now, but how do we take those stories on to, those women that are younger than us so that they can carry on the torch?
Yeah, I think I have a daughter who just turned 27, and so I get to interact with the young feminists of today. And by the way, they do use the word feminist. I know that for some period of time that became sort of a negative connotation. But young women do care about important issues, whether they're issues that affect women specifically or not. I mean, obviously, issues like abortion rights um, are are issues that are very important to young women, and they may not have fully appreciated 10 years ago in their lives the uh, the magnitude of some of the policies decisions being made, whether they're in Congress or at the state capitol, whether they're in the courts. They may not, as teenagers, have understood the magnitude of those decisions, but certainly as they come into young adulthood, I think they really get it. Um, what I would say is that I guess what I would tell young women today that are thinking about how they can become involved in community issues is, again, you do have to stay committed to that long game. Um, for younger people, their lives have changed so dramatically. From the time they go from being children to teens to young adults. Um, and the idea of working on something for years might seem uh, daunting, especially in a world where everything around them in the media changes so quickly and everything in their lives changes so quickly. But change can be hard. Um, it can take years. It can take decades to really change an issue. So just staying committed over the long term, um, being unafraid to say what you mean and mean what you say, um, not being afraid to be called, a feminist, or somebody who is loud and really using their voice. Uh, that's what our voices are for.
So speaking of longevity, you've been with SC2 25 years, right? You all have been around changing
Yes.
lives for 25 years. What made you switch from working on in such a public front of these issues to more on the marketing communication side?
Well, you're right. We have been doing this work for 25 years. I've been with SE2 for about 23 years. And it really was a seamless transition for me. Uh, if you work on something that you care about, which for me was getting a job with Pat Schroeder, like I said, when I was in my late 20s, and really understanding the power and influence that communications can have on important issues, um,
Yeah.
was really such a an opening of my eyes, and I just was able to move pretty seamlessly into the work that we're doing today because the common thread is uh, talking about important issues. However, you're doing that, whether that's through media, whether it's through in the work that you do, Alvina, through community outreach, community organizing. If you are doing something that you really care about, that transition seems easy. It may not have seemed easy at the time, but in when I look back, it really was easy because I was doing something that I loved. Uh, Throughout our 25 years in business at SE2, all we've ever done is work on important, pressing public issues. And so today we're a bigger agency doing bigger projects, larger campaigns, more integrated advertising campaigns than we were 20 years ago. But the common thread is the same. We're still working on issues like tobacco prevention and making sure that people have access to resources to help them quit smoking. Um, we've been doing that for more than 25 years. Working on issues related to childcare, early care and learning. So we still are doing the same kind of work, even though the clients might look different, the landscape is different, but we care about these issues, and so working on them has really been a joy.
What were some of the challenges or differences between working in the political space and working on the business space, especially as a woman?
Oh, that's interesting. So certainly in my lifetime, there are many more women in policy work in politics than there were, when you and I were younger, or I'm older than you are, but
Right.
there's just many more women involved in the policy space than there were 30 or 40 years ago. Um, so that has been an interesting thing to watch. The, what is the same is that women who really use their voice and, like I said, are unapologetic about saying what they believe and standing up for what they believe, still are called, shrill, or I don't want to use the B word, but the word
Mhm.
with 5 letters.
Yeah.
Um, Women, even today, are still called those things if they're very fierce, and so that is something that has evolved, I think, in that there are more women in that space, but some of the criticisms continue to be the same, which is unfortunate. Um, in business, I have been involved with different business organizations through the years, um, working to support women in business. And I think that there is a balance that you have to strike when you are a woman in business between um, bringing those skills and attributes that are really um, natural to women, whether that is, hearing a room, or um, you know,
Yeah.
mediating differences, things like that, that might come naturally to women. I think you have to balance doing that with, again, digging and really advocating for
Yep.
what you believe and being tough. Um, because, in many respects, the business world continues to be a man's world. And, you know, in my experience, men are not necessarily going to wait for you to advocate for what you believe. You have to get out there and do it yourself.
So, in our conversations, you've mentioned to me that you were part of a cohort that provided support to business leaders like yourself. Let's talk about mentorship and how mentorship never ends. And I've talked about this with other folks as well, is that at all levels of our career, we should always be looking around for those kinds of support. When have you done that during your career, and what was most impactful about those experiences?
Yeah. You know, one of the most important mentors I ever had, it was curious that it was a sort of a business mentor, was my mother. My mom, who passed away 5 years ago, um, had her own business. She was a consultant, um, and I did everything in her office growing up as a teenager. I traveled with her sometimes and would see her being a woman in business. So just being around other women in business, I think, is important, whether you call it an official mentorship or not. I learned so much from watching her. Um, and just doing everything in business. I mean, you really have to do everything. You have to understand why it matters if things are grammatically correct. You have to
Yeah.
maintain relationships. You have to be able to be authentic, but at the same time, you have to be able to put on a face and perform sometimes. So that was a mentorship that I didn't really ask for, but inadvertently received, and had probably the most profound influence on my life as a woman in business. Um, but I've had other important mentors that are men. I have learned a great deal from our partner, Eric Anderson, who I've worked with now for almost 25 years, um, and just gained so much from those relationships with men mentors as well. Um, and I have either offered to or been asked to mentor younger women, whether I'm mentoring them around their career or around specific skills that they use, like writing, um, or just, you know, serving as a sounding board for them. I think all of those things have value, whether you're seeking it as a woman in business from someone else
Yeah.
or whether you're giving it to a younger woman.
It's almost like when you're in these spaces, you just have to absorb what's happening around you and just like be aware of decisions that people are making, listen to how they're interacting with the client, and just pick up on those little things. Also, recognizing we're not perfect and we're all just trying to do our best at the end of the day. So, so you talked about kind of grinning and bearing it. What do you do when you have a bad day or if something goes wrong? How do you recover from that?
Well, I want to come back to that and answer that in a second, but before I forget it, I do want to follow up on something that you just mentioned, in terms of the little things that you pick up by just being with someone, watching them, observing them as they do their work. I think that a real, well, I don't think I know that a real very significant change occurred with COVID and everything that is with us in the business world post COVID. And I think that in some respects, young people in business today are at a disadvantage because they're not working in an office with
Yeah.
people who have been doing their work longer than them, um, having the ability to collaborate with whether it's their mentors or supervisors, their coworkers, even the people that work for them, not being able to do that in person, I think is having an impact on people in business today. And I don't know if we've fully seen the effects of that. When I think about, the things that I learned being in the car, going to
Yeah.
meetings with different people that I worked with, whether you're on the way to the meeting or on the way home, and those conversations usually are really different. Um, we're not doing that today. Nobody's leaving their office or their home in some cases. So get out, interact in person, go to lunch with people, try to meet with people in person as much as you can. And then back to your question about what do I do when I am having a bad day. Um, I am not going to lie. I mean, I have had many bad days in my career. Um, I have had days where I had to go get in my car and drive around because I thought I was going to cry at work. Um, I've had those experiences. Sometimes just a change of location
Yeah.
can help me if I'm having a difficult day, whether you're feeling conflicted about something. Sometimes just getting up and moving and going to work somewhere else. Maybe you go to a coffee shop. Maybe you are working at home. Maybe you go into the office. That can help me. And talking things through with others, whether it's coworkers or people not even coworkers, can help me get through some tough experiences. Um, and lastly, the thing that I think is just the greatest gift to all of us is that we live in, well, those of us who live in Colorado, just getting outside. It
Right.
does wonders. When you're having a bad moment, just get out there and go for a walk. It'll change your outlook on the day.
Yeah, I feel like people, I mean, we should all take our jobs and ourselves very seriously, but we should never take ourselves so seriously that we're self-sabotaging and the rest of the day is going wrong because we're unable to
Yeah,
recover from little things. Because for us, things that we're trying, obviously we're trying our best, we fail at something. In the big scheme of things, it's not gonna have a
right.
huge effect on the day, and
Yeah,
we can make
yeah.
somebody else's day better by just moving through it and getting through it. I had a speech coach that told me, if because I cry a lot, I'm a crier. So she was like, "If you ever are crying in a speech, just keep talking. That's the only way for the crying to go away because you have to keep breathing." And I feel like that's a good a good movement for life. Just keep going, just keep talking, just try to get through it until it goes to the back of your mind and you're able to recover and get back to doing whatever you needed to get done that day.
Absolutely. Whatever terrible thing happened today, whether it was your responsibility or not, in the scheme of things, you're right. It's not going to be a big deal. You're going to look back on it, and I had a work colleague who used to say everything's either a good time or it's a good story.
I feel like it's like the rear view mirror thing. Like things in the rear might look closer than they appear. So like
Yeah,
those things are way back. Just move on.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, we're running out of time, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what do you do for fun? I mean, I see you in the office a lot and we've done business meetings together, but I want to know more about you. What do you do when you're just have a day off?
I'm often horsing around. I am a horse person. I do have a horse, and it is the thing that just makes me so happy. I get outdoors a lot. I'm try to be pretty active, whether it's walking or skiing or going up to the mountains. Whatever I can do to be outside is energizing for me. So that's most of what I do when I want to have fun.
You're my second horse boss.
Ah, that's
my
that's random.
my boss in TV. Yeah, my boss in TV, Natalie Curtino, who's a realtor now in Broomfield. She also has multiple horses, and I think she's competing now. Um,
Wow, great.
with the jumps and everything. It's really
Yeah,
fascinating. I mean, the
yeah.
inner workings of the horse community. So I'll tell you the short family story. So my grandfather purchased a horse that got kicked out of the United States for kicking his mother. That's what the legend is. So he bought the horse, took it to Mexico, and he had the first international horse race. So there was a horse on the American side and a horse on the Mexican side of the fence, and they did a horse race. So then this
Wow.
man from another town had challenged my grandfather to a race, and everybody bet against my grandfather. He ended up winning the race with his horse. The horse is called Relapago or Lightning. And now there's a famous song about it. It's a very famous song. They made a movie about it.
Very
And this all
nice.
happened in the 50s. My mom was like 5 or 6 years old. And so he's a legend. And that song has just made the song legendary. So I'll show you the pictures if you're ever curious.
Yes, I
So I
definitely
do
want to
also
see it.
have horse background. I have horse ancestors.
It's good ancestors to have.
Well, Susan, I really appreciated this time. I feel like we're all fangirling on Susan, and we will. As soon as the office hears this podcast, I think they're going to love it. So thank you so much for taking a chance, bringing me into the fold, and making me a part of SE2. It's a huge opportunity. I'm so excited about all the things that we can do together. And I remember the first time we talked on the phone, I hung up the phone and I was talking to a coworker of mine. I said, this is going to be a big deal. I just talked to Susan, who at the time, I think the first time I heard of SE2 was way back when I was in broadcasting and you all were doing media buys. But that always stuck in my head, and I worked with multiple people that you all had on your team. And so I knew this was a big deal, and I'm so glad it's came to fruition, and now I'm part of the team.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you, Alvina, are bringing a whole new perspective and vitality and network to the work that we do, and I'm so excited.
Thank you, Susan. Now concludes another great episode of Alvina Talks Shift. Thank you for watching Alvina Talks Shift. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, engage, empower, evolve. If you liked this episode, or if you want more content like this, go to alvinatalkshift.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.